We have an NHL trade to discuss between the Montreal Canadiens and the Nashville Predators, who have swapped minor league players, and I want to take a look at the Montreal Canadiens' lack of success with recent first-round draft picks. We'll get into the trade and those details coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a trade to discuss. It is a minor league deal, but looking at the details of this trade just helped me realize that the Montreal Canadiens have traded yet another former first-round selection. So I also want to take a quick look here at their draft history and lack of success of having any first-round picks turn out to be players in their lineup, and hopefully that'll change here over the next few years. But the Montreal Canadiens and the Predators have swapped players that sends Michael McCarron from Montreal over to the Predators in exchange for Lauren Dauphin, who's also a 2013 draft selection who's been playing in the minor league. So they swapped 2013 draft picks that have really had a hard time becoming regular NHL players. Dauphin has, I think, 38 NHL games to his name, all with the Arizona Coyotes, but he's also bounced around a fair bit. This is his fourth trade. He's gone from the Coyotes, where he was drafted, over to the Blackhawks in the Nicholas Chalmerson trade. Then he was traded back to the Coyotes when they acquired Anthony Duclair, and then he went from there over to the Predators in another trade, and now from the Predators over to the Montreal Canadiens. So it's probably pretty doubtful that either of these guys will ever become regular NHL players, but I guess we'll see if they have any hope on that. Maybe in a new system, new coach, maybe they'll get things turned around. I know in McCarron's case, I'm just not really sure he's ever going to be able to keep up from a speed perspective and skating perspective at that NHL level. He had showed signs at the American Hockey League level, and before that, before he was drafted, he was a fairly decently touted prospect, but things unfortunately have just not worked out, just like many of the other former first-round picks of the Montreal Canadiens over the past decade. Now, I'm going to show you a graphic here from CapFriendly.com, who put up this information earlier. So once I seen this on Twitter, I kind of wanted to look at it a little bit further and discuss it here in a video today to see what your thoughts are, because it looks as though even though the Habs have drafted relatively well in recent years, if you look back from 2009 up to the present, there really isn't much on their roster for players that they've drafted, and there's very little on their roster for players that have been first-round selections. So let's take a quick look here at the graphic from CapFriendly.com. You'll see here numerous first-round selections in the last 10 years that are no longer with the organization. Of course, they had Louis LeBlanc from 2009, who was a highly touted prospect forward that was drafted. Of course, he's French-Canadian as well. He was really looked upon as being one of the next big-time French hockey players to really make it big in Montreal. He was let go once he was a restricted free agent. He was not given a qualifying offer, made an unrestricted free agent, and never returned to the NHL. In 2010, they used their first-round pick to take Jared Tenorti, who was, looked upon as being a big, strong defenseman. Tenorti's been a pretty solid minor league defenseman. He's a captain right now of the Milwaukee Admirals. So he's, pretty decent in that respect, but never really amounted to be a regular NHL player. Of course, they had 2011. They selected defenseman Nathan Beaulieu, who has stayed in the NHL and has had a semi-decent career, but not with Montreal. He did not really last there too long before he was dealt. Their 2012 first-round selection was a pretty high pick, where they selected Alex Galchenyuk. Of course, we know Galchenyuk's story. He did have some decent, moderate success in Montreal before being traded, and has since bounced around on a couple of occasions, and he's been in the rumor mill about possibly being traded here again, but of course he's been gone from the Habs for a few years. Of course, our 2013 selection was Michael McCarron, who was just traded here today. In 2014, they drafted in the first round Nikita Sherbak, who they ultimately put through waivers, was claimed, and then bounced out of the league. In 2015, now this player at least is still with the organization, Noah Juulsen, but he's yet to establish himself as a regular NHL defenseman. Noah Juulsen certainly battled a lot of injuries and other issues, which has kind of kept him from being a regular, but there is hope for him to become a regular NHL defenseman, I do believe. Of course, 2016, they drafted Mikhail Sergachev in the first round. As we know, he was traded for Jonathan Drouin, so at least that was turned into another player who's on the roster, better than we can say for a lot of these other guys. Now, of course, other players that were drafted in the first round that are still with the organization, the last few here, you get Ryan Poehling from 2017, Jesperi Kotkaniemi from 2018, and Cole Caulfield of 2019. So obviously all those 3 first-round selections at this point in time, at least, all look to be players who should become regular NHL players. There's no reason, at least as of now, to believe that they won't be successful players as well and potentially play relatively critical roles for this team down the stretch. I can see Poehling being a middle 6 center. I can see Kotkaniemi maybe being a number 1, possibly a number 2 center. I'm not sure what his ceiling is just yet, but at the very least, I think we can probably say he has good potential to be at least a number 2 center. And then you get Cole Caulfield, who at this point looks like he could be a solid, dynamic goal scorer if he continues on at that NHL level like he's done at college hockey and before that through the U.S. National Team Development Program. He's certainly been on a tear and has scored everywhere he's played so far. So if he can keep that up, they might have themselves quite a gem here in the not too distant future. But if you take a look at their overall roster, and really look at their full drafting record here, which you can get all this information as well from HockeyDB.com. That's where I did most of the research after I saw the tweet from Cap Friendly. It's a great resource if you're not quite familiar with it. They have all kinds of history there on the draft, as well as a bunch of other information on pretty much every hockey player who's ever played pro hockey. But if you look at the rest of the roster, the only players they have right now on the roster that are active that they've drafted since 2009 includes Brendan Gallagher, who was a 5th round pick in 2010, Arturi Lehkonen, who was a 2nd round pick in 2013, and a couple of young defensemen who are still establishing themselves with like Victor Mente, who was a 4th round pick in 2016, and then you've got Cale Fleury, who was a 3rd round pick in 2017. So that's only 4 players on the roster that you've drafted between 2009 and 2017. Now, of course, they're not the only guys on the roster totally that have been drafted. There's like Carey Price, for example, was drafted prior to 2009, and they do have a few younger players as well who has come from the last couple of drafts. But it just goes to show that they really haven't had a lot of success with first-round draft selections. There's still hope and potential for their last few here, but the Montreal Canadiens really need to start taking better advantage of those early picks in the draft. Thankfully, they found some pretty good gems in the 2nd, 3rd, and later rounds here, which certainly helped them fill out their roster. In today's NHL, where you really have to draft and develop to really turn out your top players, it really shows that Montreal appears to have done a better job of that in the last few years, but only time will tell how these players develop and as they become regular NHL players or not, or how their careers progress. I just want to take a look at those interesting facts of Montreal Canadiens first-round picks over the last decade and how there's very few still with the organization. So let me know your thoughts on this minor trade. Do you think Michael McCarron or Lauren Dauphin will ever become regular NHL players? And hopefully the Montreal Canadiens' more recent first-round picks become solid players that remain on the roster for many years to come. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.